Ladies and gentlemen, so now we have our watercolor background. It's all dry. You can see these really cool creases that were created from the saran wrap. We also have our starry background. So we're now going to be creating the planets and the land for our spacescape. We're going to be doing this by taking just caps and running them across the back side of our watercolor piece of paper. So you can decide if you want yours to be more central, if you want it to be a lot of land and a little space, or if you want there to be like hills. You're going to kind of create your landscape using our circles that we're going to then be planets for the background too. So I'm going to just go through and trace these out. All the way across. And you can kind of make them either straight across or wavy, depending on what kind of landscape you want. Let's see, I want a little bit of a bigger one. So I'll use this. And notice I'm not overlapping the circles. They are pretty close to each other. All right, so now that I have this going all the way across my paper, I'm going to carefully cut it out. This is one of the things we want to focus on in terms of craftsmanship, is making sure that we're cutting out these circles nice and clean, so when they eventually become planets in the background, they look like perfect spheres. So when you're cutting these out, I recommend opening the scissors just a little bit. This will allow you to make smaller turns. So if you open it wide, that's going to cause a very large straight cut, but little ones allow for smaller turns. And I'm going to avoid cutting around the circles and then cutting out, because I am going to be using the extra as our land for our spacescape. So I'm going to go through and carefully cut all of these circles out. All right, so now I have all of my planets cut out, and now I'm left with these two pieces. I can choose one of these pieces that will become a part of my spacescape. So again, when we create the illusion of space in our artwork, the closest part is always going to be at the bottom. So I'm going to choose one piece that I'm going to glue perfectly at the bottom. I want to make sure I lay out all of my pieces first. I can go in and kind of trim these two however I want to make them a little bit more interesting or believable. So I'm not going to glue this down yet because I want to lay out all of my planets first. And I was really careful with cutting out my planets so they're nice clean spheres eventually. So we are also wanting to make sure we're using a variety of sizes to create the illusion of space, because again, those things that are smaller are going to appear further away unless they're overlapping. So we also want to make sure we're overlapping things as well. So you can kind of play around with how you want things to lay out on your spacescape. And once you have a composition that you like, then you can start gluing things down. Again, being mindful of your craftsmanship when we're gluing things down. We want to glue the thing that is the furthest away. So I'm going to start with this planet. And we're going to use the super tight school glue. So again, I don't need a lot. I'm just going to go around the sphere and spread it around with that glue spreader that's at the top of the glue bottle. Take it, make sure I press it down nicely. So if you're focusing on your craftsmanship, when you're gluing this down, you shouldn't have puddles of glue coming out of it, because that's using too much glue, so you're not using the materials correctly. And you don't want to have it too little that your planet's going to fall out of the space, right? Because that would be kind of weird. So now I'm going to glue down my land. The big thing with gluing down your land is you want to make sure that you're gluing it all the way at the bottom and making sure that there's no edges of our black space paper showing up, because then it's going to look like that land isn't actually land. It's some kind of rock formation floating in the space, which doesn't really make sense. So really make sure that when you're gluing these things down, you're being mindful and taking your time with where you're gluing them. So I'm gonna go ahead and glue this on the bottom, really making sure it's all the way lined up with the bottom of my space paper and the edges so that none of the black paper is showing through. Give it a nice massage. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and glue down the rest of my planet. All right, so now I have all of my planets glued into the background. Again, making sure that you're mindful about your composition and where you're laying things out. It should be well balanced with about equal things on both sides. And you should be thinking about maybe even having things coming off the page to make the eye imagine that this spacescape is going on for an eternity, and I can always just trim that with the paper cutter then. All right, so again, craftsmanship, we're focusing on cutting out these circles nice and clean so they will eventually look like perfect sphere planets in our spacescape. When we're gluing, we're using the appropriate amount of glue so there's not glue sticking out of it, and all of our objects are glued down nicely. Again, making sure your landform is perfectly glued at the bottom of your paper so that none of the black paper is showing visibly through on the sides or the bottom. All right, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with today. Have fun. All right, fifth graders, so now that we have our planets and our land placed, we're gonna talk about how we can add value and details to really make some of our objects pop. So we can create the illusion of space by showing that there's a light source, right? So we can create illusion of space by showing that light can shine on a three-dimensional surface in a certain spot and not in other spots. So we're gonna turn these circles into spheres by just choosing a light source. I'm gonna decide that my light source is gonna be coming from the left corner. So that means everything on the right bottom side is going to be the darkest part of these spheres. But you're also gonna wanna consider too, that some of these shadows might be coming from other planets too. So I'm gonna start here, I'm gonna go right along the edge. There's two different pieces of charcoal you can use. There's the rounded, that's gonna be a softer pressed charcoal, so it's gonna spread easier for you. I recommend using this when you're creating your value because you're gonna get a greater value scale. This rectangular one is pressed a little harder, so this is great if you wanna get a nice clean line that doesn't necessarily spread as easily. So I'm gonna go along the edge that's going to have the darkest value, really right along the edge, and then I'm gonna just take my finger and blend it out. So you can create a greater value by making a little bit more. So I'm even putting my tool on its side right now and spreading it out that way. I can go in if I do want it even darker than that and add a little bit more. So really making sure that you're going all the way to the edge of the planet, really trying to make it look like a sphere instead of a circle. So I'm using my finger and curving it because spheres are round, they're not straight. So I wouldn't rub straight across back and forth. I would curve my finger to really emphasize that three-dimensional form. I'm going to continue that with all of my objects in space, so all of those planets you added. And you could even have this have a little bit of a shadow from the planet behind, in front of it, if you wanted. Be very mindful of your craftsmanship. If I were to accidentally get a lot of charcoal on this planet right here, I would want to make sure I took my eraser and cleaned that up so that it doesn't appear like it's behind it. Okay? So erasers will erase chalk, so if you need to do that, you can. So now our planets are really starting to look like they're popping. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to all of my planets. All right, now that I have added that value to all of my planets, you can see how they look much more like spheres instead of circles. Be very mindful that you're always being aware of where that light source is coming from so that your shadow is going to be on the same of each of them. Be very mindful with how you're blending to make it look as realistic as possible. Really mindful of your craftsmanship. So my hands are really dirty now, so if I wanted to, I could grab paper towel and wipe them off for this next part. The next part we're gonna focus on is details. Things that are closer, we're able to see a lot more details. So because our land in the bottom is a lot closer, we're gonna add some more details to it to make it appear even closer. One way you can do that is creating a texture on your surface. So over on the counter, you can use this tool to create some really sharp edges, angular edges along the surface of your planet. So I'm gonna use this tool and the harder pressed charcoal. I'm again going to be mindful of where that light source is coming from. So all of my shadows are going to be coming on this side. So I'm actually gonna hold my tool with my left hand so that the charcoal will be creating a shadow on this side. I'm gonna start at one point and draw a line coming down. Leaving my piece of cardboard there, I'm now going to pull along it to create that shadow. And then you're gonna create a really nice shadow coming off of it. Again, I'm gonna continue this all the way down to create that look of nice sharp edges along my planet. So you can create whatever kind of texture you want along your planet's surface. I just need to be aware of where that light source is coming from, and it does have to add some detail so it looks like that land source is a lot closer to us. So the more detail and time I take into this, the more realistic this is going to look. So I'm going to continue this all the way across my land surface. And it makes certain parts look like they're further back or have a greater, darker crevices by adding some more shadows to them. So I'm going to just go into a couple of these areas and just add a little bit more value to make them look like they're a little bit deeper. Use some of these tools. I can use the white oil pastel and the white chalk.